Joining us now is the sports editor for the Daily Cougar, James Mueller. James, thanks so much for taking the time to come chat with us. How are you today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Exciting season. I feel like every time we go into a Houston season nowadays, it's for one way or another really exciting. And then if it wasn't super exciting at the beginning of the season, we get to the middle of the year and they've won an alarming amount of games, and then we're talking about it as an exciting season. This one in particular, I think, had a lot of juice around this year's season. Marcus Sasser coming back from injury, the freshman class, elite on paper, and lots of people, in a year with plenty of turnover. There was a lot of excitement around this program. It's December 15th. We're about a month and a half into the season. What were your expectations? What conclusion did you come to in the preseason about this team, and maybe how has it changed in the first 11 or so games into the season?
Yeah, so entering the season, I thought this team would be really good. Kelvin Sampson's one of the best coaches in college basketball, in my opinion. He gets the most out of his players, and I mean, even last year, you mentioned how Marcus Sasser was out. Also, guard Tremont Mark, one of the key pieces, missed most of the season as well, and they still were able to find a way to make it to the Elite Eight, and where they shot awful against Villanova, but were 2 3-pointers away from going back to the Final Four. So I knew with those pieces returning, and then the freshmen that they brought in, I didn't really know exactly what to expect because I haven't seen them play at a college level, but I knew they had the pieces there. And so far through, the first month and a half of the season, it's been about what you expect. There's obviously some growing areas. The freshmen are still, getting into, getting more comfortable in college basketball, and under Kelvin Sampson, Jarris Walker, who was, the big one, the 5-star forward. He's had his moments of, brilliance. He's also shown some typical freshman struggles you expect. And then, having Sasser back out on the court to complement Mark, and then point guard Jamal Shed, who took a huge leap last season. It's been about what you expect. I mean, going in, I thought the only game up to this point they would lose possibly would be Alabama. And of course they did. But for the most part, still a top 5 team right now. And they've sort of shown people why many predict for them to, be right here in Houston when April comes around for the Final Four.
We're going to get to Marcus Sasser later. I want to talk about the freshmen real quick here, because I feel like because Mark and Sasser were coming back, because Jamal Shed was coming back, it was easy for this freshman class to get undervalued or underappreciated in terms of their importance to this team and just what these guys can offer. You mentioned Jarris Walker. That we're talking about one of the top 10 or so recruits in the country. You look at, for example, Brandon Mueller at Alabama. He's, leading scorer, key player on the team, sort of the guy. That's not the role that these Houston freshmen are playing because of all the returners. What has kind of stuck out to you about these freshmen the first month and a half or so of their careers, and kind of what do you think we might be able to expect from them as they get more and more comfortable at the college level?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good point you brought up, how, other teams, they got to rely on freshmen, whereas, this Houston team has veteran guys. They got a preseason All-American in Marcus Sasser. So I think that's really helps ease some of the transition. For Jarris Walker, Terrence Arsenault is another one. He was a 4-star coming out. He really shined to get to Oregon and comes off the bench 15 or so minutes a game. But I think it helps ease their transition because they're not coming in right away. Obviously, they've got the talent, they've got the skill, but they're not having to go out there and be the guy, have the team on their shoulders from the get-go, which I think is huge, because no matter how good you are in high school, there is still a learning curve when you go up to college basketball, and especially, playing just the talent level you see all across the country. So I think overall the freshmen have sort of been, like I said earlier, what you would expect. There's those struggles, but then you also see that raw potential, and I've seen how they've grown just, through the first month and a half of the season. And, come NCAA tournament time, these could be the guys that push Houston over the top if they make a deep run. But yeah, there's still this growing period, but there's a lot there. And the more and more time they spend under Kelvin Sampson and just, buy into this culture, the system he's built, just the better they'll continue to get.
I think that's the best play, right? Everybody wants the 5-star freshman. And whether you're depending on them to score every point or 0 points, you want them on your team. But exactly what you just said, to be at a spot with the personnel that is, if we get to the NCAA tournament and they're just pushing us over the edge, if they're making us that much better, of course, to a certain extent, you need them to play well to make a deep run, but it's not the guys that you're dropping the load on when you get to the tournament. And that's kind of a great place for to unlock young players in a big tournament setting to be able to just kind of let them do their thing and let the veterans and, not just veterans, but all American caliber veterans do their thing. We're coming off a weird, and maybe you feel differently, but a weird Alabama game. It was a game that the first 20 minutes were close, and then Houston goes on this run right out of halftime, get up 44-29. I had to go to work. I turned it off, went to work, and I was like, okay, I don't have to think about this game anymore. And then I'm driving to work, and on the top of the hour Sports Center update, it's Houston, Alabama comes back from 15 to beat Houston in Houston. What did you take away from the Alabama game? What did you see happen in that last 16 minutes where they gave up that 15-point lead? Just kind of what'd you come away thinking about from the Alabama game?
Yeah, so sort of like you, I had that same thought about 3-4 minutes into the second half. They're up 15. I'm like, this is probably over. They weathered the storm in the first half. Bama made run early. They kept it close, took a lead late in the first half. And then, when you start out the second half up 15, I mean, it's sort of what you expect. You expect them to close it out. You expect Bama, to make a little push, but I didn't think they'd overcome 15 points. But Kelvin Sampson hit it right on the head in his post-game presser. He basically said Virginia made this mass substitution. They took a bunch of starters out, and they just started. They went away from some of their sets and just said, "You got to beat us. We're a quick team. You got to beat us on the ball." And they had that first step. They blow by a Houston defender, get easy layups, dunks, things like that. Set up, and then when you're penetrating the paint like that, it sets up open threes and stuff like that. So that was the big thing. Is Houston struggled to keep Alabama in front of them defensively, which allowed Alabama to crawl back into the game. And then also Tremont Mark fouled out at about the 8-minute mark, and he's one of those veterans. Sasser wasn't shooting well. He's been dealing with the thing over his left eye. He cut it a couple days prior, and so he was wearing little goggles, and those were fogging up and stuff. So he wasn't like the scorer that you expect from him. And so Tremont was carrying some of that load. Jamal Shed also. But once you lose a player like that, it's just tough to throw different guys, younger, inexperienced guys in against one of the top teams in the country. And so things just started to fall apart. And then down the stretch, it's close, but it came down to free throws, and Alabama, Brandon Mueller, 6 for 6 over the final minute. Houston missed 4, I think. They were 2 of 6, I'm pretty sure. And so it just came down to that.
Do you feel like it was more of kind of just this unexpected series of events, like you said? Nate Oates kind of scratched the game plan and really tried to spread the floor. That's when things changed. Do you feel like that was just sort of a in-game change that Houston wasn't prepared for, or do you feel like this is maybe something that other teams are going to look at down the stretch, whether that's Virginia this weekend or in the NCAA tournament, and say that Houston's been so good defensively for so long under Kelvin Sampson? Do you feel like this is something that other teams are going to look at and say, that's how we get at them, this is a concern moving forward, or do you feel like it's just kind of a one-off thing?
I think it's a little bit of both, because Houston doesn't lose much under Kelvin Sampson. They haven't. They, since 2017-18, they have the second most wins, just trailing Gonzaga. So whenever someone beats Houston, teams ahead of their schedule is going to look at that blueprint. But not all the teams have the personnel that Alabama has. So you might not be able, sure, it worked, but other teams might not be able to play that way. And so they'll have to find other creative ways. I think Houston's still a really good defensive team, but I think this was sort of eye-opening and just showed them they've got to be better on the ball. That first step, that's something Sampson emphasized after the game is, that first dribble, whoever wins that is likely going to win the possession. And that's something they've got to hammer home, because if you do face teams with, the quickness from the guards and then the ability to, shoot the three when you penetrate the paint and people come crashing in, then it could cause problems. So they've got to work on, not letting those blow-bys happen and things like that. So I think, there's a little bit of both. Teams can try to sort of emulate what Alabama did, but at the same time, Houston will make adjustments as well. And we'll just see how it plays out. But certainly whenever a team beats Houston, you're going to look at that and try to take something from that.
I want to talk about Marcus Sasser for a second. Right now, he's averaging 16, 3, and 2.5 basically on 42, 30, 85 splits. For what it's worth, at the end of last year, he was just 12 games last year, so it's actually a pretty good spot to kind of take into account. We're basically at the same spot that he was last year when he stopped playing. He was 43% from deep over on about 8 attempts last year. He's 30% on just over 6 attempts this year. Right, we talked about he wasn't completely healthy in this last game, but also has had some some inefficient performances kind of throughout the season. He's the type of guy that I would never come onto a podcast and say I'm worried about Marcus Sasser, especially a guy who's getting as much attention as Marcus Sasser does. Like, he might be the biggest name on anybody's scouting report before a game all season. Like, that's how good he is. I guess how would you grade Sasser so far this season? And are you worried about any of those efficiency things and how they might translate to just the team's offensive efficiency in general?
Yeah, I'd probably give him C+, B- so far. Like you mentioned, he has not shot the ball great. There's been a few games where he shot really well, but for the most part, it's been inconsistent and not the typical Marcus Sasser you think of, who, if you leave him open behind the arc, he's going to drain it. But I think the biggest thing, and this is something he's hammered home, Kelvin's hammered home, is just looking for other ways for him to impact winning than just his scoring. Of course, you're not going to tell him to stop shooting because he's a great shooter. And eventually the makes will come, even though, he's been in a little bit of a slump. But, looking for ways, he's getting more of a Kelvin Sampson compared it to a couple of years ago when Quentin Grimes was on Houston during the Final Four run, 2020, 2021. Sampson compared what the treatment defenses are giving Sasser to that. And so teams are defending him differently than he's seen before, and that's contributed to some of the struggles. So looking for other ways to impact winning, when teams are doing everything to take your shot away, how else can he help? Whether, draw the double team and kick it out, assists are always something that he's working on. Defensively, he's typically on one of the opponent's best players. So just impacting the game that way, outside of his scoring. So I think those are the big things you look at. I wouldn't say there's like areas to be concerned about because, his shot's going to come around and he's a veteran. He'll make adjustments. But I think just, he hasn't seen the treatment that he's gotten this year in the past, because this year is his first year truly as the guy. Because last year, like y'all mentioned, he played 12 games. He was barely there. Now, when a team's playing Houston, the first person they're circling is number 0 because he's proven that he can hurt you if you don't stop him. So I think just that adjustment period to, getting more attention than typical and stuff is the big thing, but he'll be fine over the long run. But yeah, there's certainly areas that he's got to improve on if he wants to live up to that All-American status.
And
Can you kind of
sorry, go ahead, Josh.
Can you kind of put into context just how important he is to this team? It's obvious to say, yes, he's arguably the best guard in the country. He's the leading scorer on this team that's, not going to go score 80 points a game. That's just not the way they play. All-American, all of that kind of stuff. Just being around this team every single day, how important to the ceiling and kind of the potential of this team as a hopeful national title contender do you think Marcus Sasser really is?
Yeah, I mean, in order to win a title, they got to have him. If he goes down like he did last year, I wouldn't think Houston would win or even have a shot at a title. But I think a bigger impact that people don't notice is just his leadership. He's a guy that people on this team follow, and it's very evident in practices and stuff. He's got to bring it every day in practice. That's something Kelvin's emphasized. His best players always have to bring it in practice because others are going to follow. And so sort of him setting the tone in practices and just the way he conducts himself, not getting too high on the good stuff, not getting too down on, bads, is just so important, especially when you have a team that's a good mix of veterans, but also, like we talked about, these young, talented players that are inexperienced and haven't had a lot of opportunities. So I think his leadership is even more vital to this team than what he does on the court. Obviously, you need both sort of intertwined if Houston's going to make a run and, be one of the last teams standing. But yeah, those are two areas where, they're just key to this team.
Josh and I both went to Butler, and we watched Kamar Baldwin, his second to last year, really be the guy for the first time, and struggled with it pretty much the entire season. There's part of me that thinks that maybe that perhaps the most difficult part about Marcus missing last season is that, I mean, he had put together the early season resume that by the end of the season, and certainly if he had played in the tournament, that he would have been seeing, premium treatment when it comes to defenses. So it's not necessarily a surprise that when we understand we got a front row seat to watching a guy who's really good go through everybody else knowing how good he is for the first time, and kind of figuring out how to deal with that. But hopefully, for Houston, that you get to the point where you feel like he's just completely acclimated to that idea. So you got Alabama on December 10th. You played St. Mary's, who's a top 20 KenPom team, or at least was at the time of playing them. They are still a top 20 KenPom team. You have this game against Virginia coming up, which we'll get to specifically here in a second. How important, but other than that, right, there's a lot. You played Oregon, but Oregon is having just a weird moment in their program. You're not really sure how good Oregon is. Other than that, the schedule, I guess light is the right word. There's a lot of mid-major teams. How important, right, what we're getting to here is how important are games like the Alabama game, like the Virginia game, because quite frankly, the AAC isn't great this year. You don't play Memphis until the end of February, which seems like the team that is at least second fiddle to Houston in the AAC this year. How important are games like this in the middle of the season to kind of build up that experience when it comes to the type of teams you're going to play in the tournament?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously when you're playing top 25 teams, these will be top 2 straight weeks with top 10 in Alabama and Virginia. It's a good measuring stick because, you're playing against the best teams in the country to this point in the season. That could obviously change, but you're able to see, sort of from the beginning where your team stands, areas you need to work on, you can experiment with different rotations, things like that, because like you mentioned, these will be a lot of the teams you're seeing in the tournament. And so the other big part of it, though, is just getting some of the younger players acclimated to these type of games, because they try to treat every game the same, but there's a little extra juice when you're in a top 10 matchup. The crowd, whether you're home or away, there's going to be more energy. And that's what you see in the tournament too. And so to get some of these games, and especially this weekend against Virginia, since it's on the road, is just huge to sort of get used to it, because if your first experience, playing in big time games comes in March, it's probably not going to be the best. And that's why we've seen, over the past few years, we've seen veteran teams win the championship. Baylor was a veteran team, Kansas. And so being able to get some of your younger guys acclimated to these big time environments and big time games where you're facing some of the best athletes in the entire country is definitely huge. And there's always learning experiences, whether you win or lose. There's so much you can take away. And so not to say the other games don't matter, but I think you get a little clearer picture just because of the caliber of teams you're playing, like in an Alabama or a Virginia.
Let's talk about this Virginia game for a second. One, do you think either of these teams actually gets to 50 points? And
it's going to be upper 40s, very low 50s.
Yeah, I'm personally kind of hoping for 49, 48 just to have the experience. But what are you looking for, and kind of what do you think Houston can take away and Kelvin Sampson can take away from this specific matchup and kind of the things that Virginia offer, because you know exactly what Virginia is going to do and what Virginia doesn't do with Tony Bennett at this point?
Yeah, for sure. So Houston played Virginia last year, blew them out. It was like, I don't remember what the final score was, but it was close to 20. But the thing about the Virginia team this year is they got so many pieces back. And Kelvin Sampson this morning, he met with the media and said they don't have a lot of weaknesses. They do a lot of things great. And, it takes mistake-free basketball to beat them. And they're really well balanced. You look at their roster, they got 4 or 5 guys averaging double figures. They obviously they don't have to score a lot to win. They can win these defensive battles like we sort of talked about, and like we anticipate this, Saturday afternoon going. And so I think this will be another, it's two similar styles where Houston's sort of the same way. They can score a lot of points, but their bread and butter is that defense. And, they're going to be most successful when they're in these, 49, 48, 55, 54, not the 93, 90 shootouts. And so I think just seeing how Houston, just how they find ways when they're facing, a team like Virginia who can hurt you in so many ways, presents probably your toughest challenge defensively so far throughout this season. There's just so much you can look to there, and I think it will, be another good, indicator to Sampson about where his team stands, and win or lose, because there'll be things you can take away, and just, if you win this game, like just the encouragement of finding a way to win in some of these, tough grind them out games, and just giving that team confidence, especially the young guys, that, we have multiple ways to win than just scoring a bunch of points.
Is there one key you're looking at, or that Kelvin Sampson mentioned, that you feel like is going to determine this game one way or the other?
Ooh, that's tough. I think the guard play will be huge. You got Clark's a veteran for Virginia. I think 5th year, if I'm not mistaken.
If not 6th, yeah.
Yeah, he's been there forever. He's played in the biggest moments. He was there last year when Houston played him. But I think that guard matchup, I'd imagine Marcus Sasser would be on him. I think that matchup will be really intriguing on both sides of the floor. And each team, has different ways to hurt you. They're not just a one-man show. So, you're not entirely relying on that, but I think that matchup between Clark and Sasser will be probably be the biggest key, in my opinion. Just who brings it more, who can sort of get the edge over the other. And I think that will go a long way in determining who ends up coming out with the W.
I'm very excited. It's one of the best, just in general. It's going to be one of the best college basketball games of years, games, days. That's the one I was looking for. One of the best college basketball days of the whole year, and Houston, Virginia is going to be right there. Let's take a look ahead for just a second. I think, without putting too many expectations on it, I think that national titles, Final Fours, contending for championships. That's what this team is built to do and expects to do and wants to do. So the question presents itself. We're a month and a half through the season. What are the things that this team needs to do between now and March to set themselves up for a Final Four run, for a national title run, whatever it might be? Is there anything that's kind of glaring right now that you think needs to be fixed, or is it fine tuning the corners and getting the freshmen more comfortable, and you think they'll be in a good spot?
Yeah, so there's a few things. One thing that Kelvin Sampson said right off the bat is they have to develop the bench better, because a lot of these guys coming off are young. And so obviously injuries can happen, foul trouble, whatever. You have to have more than just, the 5 you've put out there to start the game. So I think that's one thing you're looking to see. They don't have to play like stars, but, be consistent and be able to, when Marcus is on the bench, Jamal's on the bench, they're having an off night, something like that, they're able to come in and fill in the gaps and, keep the team in the game. So I think that's one thing. And then another thing is just Houston they've always been a great defensive team under Sampson. But the offense comes along throughout the season. And that's something Kelvin's talked about as well. So just fine tuning that as the season comes along, because, you got to have some sort of offense to win. It doesn't have to, in Houston's case, like I've said, it doesn't have to be the most explosive because of what they can do defensively, but just, getting better shot selections, getting guys like Jarris and Terrence more comfortable, when they get the ball, because there's times when they're great, but there's times when they're turning it over or just sort of look like a freshman, which is understandable because they are. And so I think those are two big things. And then just finding some different rotations. Sampson's been experimenting with a bunch of different rotations in the past couple of games. So just finding things that work, because each team's a little different. You got to learn the team. And yeah, just getting that. So when you're in, come March, okay, if we're struggling here, blah, 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 I should put these people in, whatever, things like that. So those are the big 3 things I would be looking for as the season progresses.
The other thing that we kind of wanted to highlight and get your thoughts on was the 3-point shooting, currently 199th. We went back and looked at these past couple Houston teams, a little bit better than that, but it's not like Houston has needed to be this elite 3-point shooting team to, be national title contenders, Final Four caliber teams. 6 of 24 from deep in the St. Mary's and Alabama games combined. Has that been a topic of conversation? Is that something that you are monitoring at all in terms of sort of making sure this team has the chance to reach its ceiling and that offensive improvement throughout the season, as you mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something you keep in mind, just the way the games change. Threes are a huge part. Like you said, Houston has so many different other ways they can beat you that they're not reliant on threes like some teams. But when the threes are falling, they're nearly impossible to beat. And so that's a big area of just, looking for that. They've never been a great 3-point shooting team under Sampson. They have options, but they're not gonna, by the end of the season, be top 50 or whatever. They're gonna just be average behind the arc. But I think it's just in those key moments, when you need a big shot, can they knock them down? Turn to a guy like Sasser. He's proven it. Jamal Shedd's been getting better in terms of shooting. He's still got a ways to go. Tremont Mark, Ramon Walker, Emmanuel Sharp. You've got a lot of options, but it's just the key is, in those big moments. But they do not need to become a team that's top 50 in 3-point percentage, whatever, to go deep in the tournament. But you got to make them when they count the most. And when you do make them, like I said, people aren't going to beat Houston if they're making threes.
I was looking at 3-point shooting percentage and then went back. I was okay. Yeah, last year the Elite Eight, where were they? A little better, but roughly the same place. The Final Four 2 years prior, a little better, but roughly the same place. And I like to think, right, you want to have that 3-point shot so that you can win a shootout in the tournament if you need to, or like you said, get a timely three. But you go through the Houston's tournaments the last 3 years, and there just haven't really been that many of those games. Kelvin and his teams are so good at kind of imposing the type of game that they want to play on their opponents that if you never run into a team that is going to do that, apart from maybe an elite all-time level team in Baylor a couple of years ago, then maybe it's just not quite as important if you just are always controlling the game in the way that you want to. But James, thank you so much for taking the time to come and chat with us. Enjoy the game this weekend, and we'll talk to you soon.
I appreciate it. It was fun talking with you guys.